Have you ever wondered, to what extent does our innate ability to acquire language play a significant role for human evolution? How does one form thoughts without the use of language? And how does language shape our reality? Hi, I'm Telia.
And I'm Joshua.
And welcome to our podcast, The Uncommon Senses, where we reflect on the nature of knowledge and on how we know what we claim to know.
From the dust, 143, one fell in the circle of the world like a fly buzz. A million marble mouths all blinking, moon of milky bright blue sleep.
In this episode, we're going to talk about the power of language and how it shapes our reality and the society around us. But before we can understand the power of language, we must first understand its nature, which at its core is a social construct. Social constructs are creations that are fictitious, intangible, and abstract realities, such as money, nations, and identity, things that otherwise don't exist if it weren't for humans assigning value to them. And being able to create social constructs is a powerful ability. According to renowned historian Yuval Harari, the ability to create social constructs has allowed for humans to better cooperate with each other through shared values and identity, and in his opinion is why humans have emerged as the apex predator over all other species. And language is a social construct, given that it is an example of symbolic behavior. In other words, without humans giving meaning to it, it would just be a series of nonsensical verbal sounds and written symbols. It is through using our imagination that we are able to assign them meanings that we can all agree on and hence create shared knowledge. Of course, as language develops and grows in complexity, whether it can effectively communicate shared knowledge across cultures and contexts is still contentious, but we'll discuss more on that later in our next episode, where we'll be discussing the limitations of language. Humanity's monumental achievement in acquiring language happened as a result of a series of cognitive and genetic changes that occurred around 17,000 BCE, which is known as behavioral modernity or cognitive revolution. These are changes that distinguish humans from any other species on Earth and create the framework for modern human behavior, such as the use of imagination, music, and dance, and the use of tools, so on. These changes subsequently allowed humans to develop abstract thinking, as we are able to organize our thoughts into words, as well as being able to communicate those thoughts to those around us. This allowed us to carry out highly complex tasks with the help of each other, which subsequently sparked the rise of agriculture and group hunting, eventually forming societies. This has helped us secure our food supply and use resources effectively, giving us a competitive edge in survival that many other species lack. Some scholars even argue that this is the very reason why we are able to outcompete the Neanderthals, a subspecies of archaic humans that are anatomically similar to us. But the power of language far transcends the provision of our psychological needs. Talia, have you seen the recent Marvel picture, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness?
No.
So, one of the key thematic motives of the movie is this ability to warp reality and the power that can be yielded from it. And although not in the same literal sense that language can, literally destroy or warp our reality, it actually has the power to shape the surroundings around us subconsciously. Some people argue that knowledge cannot exist without language, as many people form rational thoughts on the basis of words, hence are able to warp our perception of the world. As observed previously in our discussion of behavioral modernity, language is created so we can form abstract thoughts and create a higher form of living. Therefore, it makes sense that it becomes the dominant way of which we generate and acquire knowledge. For example, 82.5% of readers say that they hear an inner voice when reading to themselves without actually using their vocal cords to voice out the words. So it is defined as a reading voice of which only the person who is reading can hear and no one else can really listen to when they're reading. So have you ever experienced that, Talia? Have you ever experienced a reading voice when you're reading some, perhaps like books or some words you see?
Right, yeah, I definitely have a reading voice. I think it's not just when I'm reading, it's kind of like an inner monologue where, in a lot of situations where even when I first saw someone, like I'm judging them, and there's like this inner voice in my head that just tells me like to make judgments on different things. And like, of course, I think when I was younger, these voices are actually in Chinese, and then when I got
Oh,
older and become more familiar with English, sometimes they'll come in English as well. And it's pretty interesting, like how I also saw like I think I saw a video like there was like asking a person that doesn't have an inner monologue or like an inner voice how their life is going to be. And I think the condition is called aphantasia. So people without a inner monologue in their head. And it's very interesting because I remember the person they interviewed who doesn't have the inner monologue, like she's able to read super fast. So I don't know. I mean, I think we can definitely do some research on that and like also share our findings if we can, if we ever found a conclusion. But yeah, I think I definitely have an inner voice that's like constantly in different languages and like telling me different things and different judgments.
oh, I find it very interesting how you talked about your inner reading voice changes as you acquire different language abilities. So
Mm,
I think that also proves that our inner reading voice is affected by our surroundings and our educational background. So
mm,
yeah, it's very. I think it's a very interesting point of which it proves that perhaps our inner um, reading voice is a product of our
mm,
surroundings rather than an innate ability
right.
to really read in our mind. So I think it also serves perhaps it feeds into the argument between Chomsky and Skinner of how or
Mm,
whether humans acquire language or whether they are born with the ability to speak. So as you can see,
right.
like when we talk about the use of how human uses language to create realities, we can really see
Mm,
there are different conflicting theories of how we came to acquire these abilities, and also how we are able to use this as a kind of tool for us uh, to create the society that we have
mm.
now or come to know today.
And I actually I also want to make some point on like previously when you mentioned about like how language it's kind of like the rise of human civilization, like how us become the top of that chain. I think it's interesting that you mentioned that language helps us create societies and like communicate thoughts with each other, because I guess that kind of suggests that us humans, we are like social animals. And I guess it's also funny that, in the 21st century, I think we are more and more aware of the idea of like being alone and, anxiety, social anxiety issues. It's funny because, like, I guess we are programmed and wired to live in a society to communicate with each other, yet we kind of suffer, some of us kind of suffer from communicating with others. And I guess like it has quite a lot of things to do with like the internet and like just our living conditions in general. Like we are no longer there for survival reasons only. So yeah, I think I just want to make an interesting point on like the contradictive, nature of us being social animals and also us wanting to be alone more and more in the 21st century.
Oh yeah, that's definitely a very valid point, I think. And also this, it ties with this also this idea of how language can also make us feel alone or like or
Mm,
make us feel like loved, or if it can
yeah.
really inflict these really strong emotions. And I think we'll definitely discuss more about that
Mm,
when we're talking about emotions and how how emotions are generated and how people are able to use emotions as a tool to perhaps manipulate others or to
mm-hmm.
communicate as well. So definitely, language, emotions, these are all really high level things that we're talking about in terms of, the advancement of humanity as a species.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, as a counter argument to what we've discussed so far, this idea of how we are able to use language to generate knowledge. some research has actually pointed out that that may not be the case, as they have shown that rational thoughts can be formed by multiple parts of our brain, including places responsible for visualization, hence proving that knowledge does not necessarily need to be formed on the basis of language. One example of that would be the VAK learning model, which categorizes the way humans learn into visual learners, so through sight or looking at diagrams, etc. Auditory learners, so through music or through listening to lectures or other people speaking, or by kinesthetic, so like by movement or muscle memory. So all of these different ways of learning do not necessarily need to be formed by language. Hence, it serves as an example that reminds us that learning does not necessarily have to be accompanied by the use of language. If we use language as the traditional sense of which we say, oh, words or the sounding of different words. But whether or not these methods are able to form and communicate complex meaning, so really deeper meaning or like really sentimental meanings, for example, like we're trying to communicate emotions, is still up for debate. So Talia, what do you think? What kind of learner do you think you are? And do you think you're able to form complex ideas and abstract thoughts without using language in your communication?
Right. I guess, yeah. I really like the mention of the VAK learning model, because I think like in 6th grade we were like introduced to it. My form tutor introduced us to me. And I guess I'm a visual learner because I don't know. I think I learn really well by like looking at diagrams or like looking at certain patterns and stuff like that. But I really like this one because I think there's another one where they also included like reading as one of the learning tools. But I mean, I guess reading isn't really widely available for most of us, not until like the last few hundred years. And however, like being able to see, being able to listen to things, or like have movements, like most of us neurotypical and physically alright human beings are all able to have all of these, like we are kind of born with these ability. So I would say I'm definitely a visual learner, but then I do feel like sometimes abstract thoughts can be formed by auditory like learning or kinesthetics or even like visuals, because like there's so many abstract thoughts and ideas that we could communicate through like art or music, and also like dance movements. There's definitely abstract thoughts can be formed, but then it's just something indescribable to be presented through language. I think we all kind of had that feeling where we just like watched something or we just saw something and we were like, I don't know how to describe this, or how to describe what I'm feeling. So I do think that abstract thoughts can be formed, but then of course I would say like society nowadays, like we would definitely want you to explain everything through your language, kind of like exams, like write an analysis on this art piece or like this piece of music or like whatever. Like people want you to write your feelings down, even though sometimes it's not very possible. But I think the reason for that is because like language is more universal than like kind of trying to explain how you feel through a piece of art, because it can be very different between every single human being. So yeah, and also like I guess also like a lot of papers that are published predominantly in this academia field are in English, and I think that itself also narrows down a lot of the knowledges that we have, because there's only one language that is like universally, I guess, accepted or like more commonly used in a lot of papers, or like expressing a lot of our thoughts and ideas. So I guess just conclusion to this question is like I'm a visual learner, and I do think that abstract thoughts can be formed without the use of language. However, it will be quite subjective, and also exams wise it's very hard to differentiate.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think it's due to this kind of obsession we have as a like modern in this modern era that we're so obsessed with efficiency. We want
Yeah.
to communicate everything as fast as possible, as accurately as possible. So no matter in academia, as you've talked about in exams, we are expected to explain, all the different, mechanisms or all the different knowledge using, really precise and accurate language. And I think in a way, this has allowed us to really push the limits of how much humanity can advance in terms of scientific advancement or in terms of different breakthroughs. But I think in the process we kind of um, lost that ability to really use non-language based, as you said, like mediums, for example, like movies or like art, something that doesn't really necessarily uses the quickest route to express an idea, but rather uses emotions and it uses subconscious cues to allow you to slowly experience an idea instead of simply reiterating or regurgitating it. And I just think that it reminds me, in a way, it's kind of sad that, with language, we kind of lose these really authentic messages and we lose these other channels of communication when we overuse, language in the ways we communicate. So, yeah, I think what the point you brought is definitely really valid in regards to how we are able to communicate complex ideas and abstract thoughts without the use of language. It's just in perhaps a more indirect way or in a less mainstream manner than what we're used to in our society nowadays.
And honestly, I also feel like we nowadays we're actually becoming more acceptable of delivering abstract concepts and ideas through different mediums other than language. I remember pretty vividly when I was reading like Roald Dahl's Matilda or something, and Roald Dahl was criticizing Matilda's parents for like only knowing how to watch TV, and Matilda was like reading and stuff. But honestly, I feel like that was a pretty outdated idea. I think, like Matilda's parents, like their TV shows, so for sure, they're just for leisure. They aren't that intellectual. But I also feel like it's kind of interesting that, because Roald Dahl is an author, so like of course he doesn't want to lose his job and like using language to communicate. I'm so sorry, but of course he wants to use words, and I do understand like using books, this kind of medium, it can be really powerful because it allows that imagination, window. Like you can just imagine whatever you want. Like you can use your imaginations to the fullest. Meanwhile, for like watching TV, let's say, it's gonna be way more direct. Like you're gonna see it in your through your eyes. However, I think a lot of times when you're watching like these pieces, you will also have like you also definitely reflect it. If it's a really really good literature, if it's a really really good like cinematic piece or a really really good video, you would definitely think about it, and it will definitely evoke your thoughts after watching it. I think so nowadays we also have so much media so many more medium to express our ideas and our abstract thoughts through different ways. And I just think that the traditional idea of like reading books is better than watching a video. I just don't really agree with that, because there are books that are really good and there are also books that are really bad, and that's the same for like any other art forms. There are videos that are really good and also some are really really bad. But I do understand, like in this age of where we focus so much on efficiency, there is definitely that, emphasis on, posting things really fast, and like you are also exposed to so much data and information. You can become much more easy to forget about certain things. But then I think that is really the fault of like how we process information in 21st century, but not really on like videos are definitely going to be much more inferior than books. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and that's, I think especially when we live in perhaps like our Asian community, this idea that,
Mm.
TVs are bad,
Yeah.
televisions are bad, and how, this idea that you should only read, books with a lot of words and no pictures,
Mm.
like reading a dictionary, for example. So like, and I think as we've learned in our school, so back in our
Mm.
IB days, when we're learning
Yeah.
about literature, we've come across,
Yes.
how language has come to evolve in a lot of different uses other than,
Mm.
just plain words. It has,
Yeah.
integrated with pictures, as we've seen in
Yeah.
graphic novels or comics. They're now considered legitimate literature. And as you've mentioned, it
Mm.
has also um, developed into like a lot of cinematic masterpieces or like
Mm.
things you saw on TV, and how the production has greatly increased in artistic value in like
Mm.
nowadays. So yeah, I definitely agree with what you say. So I think perhaps the power of language does not lie inherently in itself, but rather the power of language lies in how we use it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Agree.
And so another argument of how language can shape our reality is through linguistic connotation. So, as we've
Mm.
mentioned before, it is not how language is powerful in itself, but
Mm.
rather how we are able to use it. So, now, Talia, I'm going to do this little activity with you about language and connotation and how it has the ability to kind of change our perception of the world. So, Talia, if I say the word diamond, what do you think of?
Ooh, I think of like really shiny things, diamond mines, and perhaps also like the beer's ad of like diamond as a capitalism tool for like marriage, as
Mm,
buying a diamond means forever slash how it's being linked to marriage. So everyone who is gonna get married is going to try and buy a diamond ring. So that's like the ultimate capitalism advertising way. But like now thinking about it, it's actually kind of stupid, right? Like you honestly, because like if you buy a diamond, then you only buy one. You're not gonna buy two because you, unless you're promoting divorce. Anyway, I guess when I first think of the word diamond, what I was thinking of is definitely shiny things, and also like the beer company. Yeah.
yes. So like definitely, I'll also share the same sentiment with you. And I also think, diamonds as something that's really expensive, and like
Mm.
as something that, as you mentioned, like something that's used in marriage. So the longevity of actually the material itself is being as a
Yes.
representation of how, marriage is supposed to be forever and how vows are
Mm.
sacred, which I find ironic because in our society nowadays, divorce rates are higher than ever. So why are we still clinging on to these traditional symbolisms? I will never understand. um,
I mean,
uh,
I mean it's good, right? If people get divorced, they're gonna buy another diamond ring. So
yeah,
then
so
the company's gonna make more money.
exactly, it feeds into this capitalist machine. So like
Yeah.
this entire marriage, industrial complex.
Oh
So
my god.
yeah, oh my God, it's turning into this conspiracy theory of how diamonds are
Yeah.
able to leech off failed marriages.
Oh wow.
And another thing that I thought of is that, diamonds are also being used in terms of literature, in terms of art, culture, or as a
Mm.
metaphor, as someone who has a good character, or as a symbolism of
Mm.
everything that's good. For example, the phrase "diamond in the rough" means someone
Mm.
who has a good character but lacks manner or education. So,
Mm.
diamond is a kind of a is a was not euphemism, a semiotic of like everything that's
Mm.
good or positive about humanity. So yeah, next I'm going to tell you another word. So the word is coal. What image does
Mm.
that spark up when I say the word coal? Dark black
Ooh.
coal.
Yeah, I think it's just really contrast with diamond. Like just now that phrase diamond in the rough. I guess the coal is the rough, basically. And yeah, I was thinking about like also the thing about diamond is that it's supposed to mean like longevity, like what you mentioned. However, coal is like you burn it and then you generate energy. Because I'm also very interested in sustainability, so I guess the word coal also symbolizes, non-renewable energy source, but it's also one of the largely used one. And yeah, I think the connotations behind the term isn't very positive for me.
Exactly. I think you brought out a really interesting point that I haven't even thought of, is that the longevity of diamonds versus coal, how coal is seen as something we consume. So we burn coal for energy. It's disposable versus diamonds. They're supposed to be unique and like one of a kind and supposedly very strong so they can withstand any forces or externalities. So, as so from I think if I can say conclusively of what we have discussed so far. So, well, we can say that diamonds and coal has very contrasting connotations. But what's interesting is that diamond and coal inherently actually does not have any difference in values, since they're just minerals formed and found in nature and are actually just formed by carbons, but works out in different structures. So, but through language, people have actually assigned different meanings to them, and in turn determined their different values. In other words, what is found in life and nature is not what is really there, but what language has taught people to find there. So everything we've seen in around us and all the kind of connotations we have is one can argue that it's actually assigned by the language that we kind of give it, and it's actually like shows that how language has the ability to warp how we see different things. And however, some would also argue the opposite, where it is society that has determined the meaning of these social constructs prior to the intervention of language. And that language is merely a vessel in which we further promote the ideas of these constructs. So in our case, society has already determined that diamonds are valuable due to their attractive appearance. So when we see a diamond, it's very transparent, it's very shiny. So in our minds, we already have this idea that it symbolizes purity. It's the idea of what we think it's pretty and what we think it's good about everything. And as opposed to coal, which is a very cheap and invaluable object that we use to create energy from. So it is not, some may argue that it is not language that creates these different connotations, but rather it acts as a vessel that perpetuates these stereotypes. So, for example, like in popular culture, we have we have films that are called Diamonds Are Forever. There's, I think, a James Bond song is also named after like Diamonds Are Forever, and there's this really famous song by Marilyn Monroe where she sang "Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend" in the movie Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and it talks about how it praises the value of diamonds and how men may grow old, girls may age, and how our beauty does not last forever, but gems are able to have this unchanging appearance. So it talks about the juxtaposition between how the beauty of humans are not, perhaps the youth and the youth in humans are not forever, but as opposed to like the longevity of these minerals. So I think some may argue that it is popular culture and it is how people has already determined the values of diamonds and coal way before language has even set foot into their minds. So I guess that presents the two opposing arguments between how is it language has affected how we see the world versus is it how we see the world that changes language. So what do you think, Talia? Which side of the argument are you more prone to leaning?
Oh, yeah, actually, this totally relates to what you're going to talk about next, which is on how, like, a reality, so, like, how what we believe are our thoughts shape language, or how does language shape our thoughts? Yeah, just vice versa. And I just like feel like you raised some really really nice examples on like you know, like how it's being portrayed in like Marilyn Monroe songs, or like how we initially talked about how like diamond is kind of like a capitalism idea to certain things. So I mean, for sure, like I think in so many times like we give connotations, we give meaning to the certain vocabulary. So I guess in terms of that question, I think in situations where we are describing like a social construct, I guess in a lot of times like our thoughts will give meanings to these language, because like diamond and coal, like these vocabulary stand alone, like what you mentioned in the natural science idea, they're very similar. They're just, you know, made of carbon, and but they have completely different, you know, functionalities. And like even if you wanted to argue like, oh, because diamond is more rare and it looks more appealing, like to the human eye, we like shiny things. But I mean, is that really the case of like diamonds being very rare? Like, or is this just the diamond mines are being controlled by quantity so then it can keep the price up? Like, yeah, I just feel like all of these words, like we inject our thoughts and connotations to these words.
Yeah, definitely. So, I think that's, one side of the argument that you mentioned, which I think,
Mm.
is very valid. You mentioned a lot of, strong evidence to support your stance. And, personally, for me, I, to be honest, for me, I really don't know, because to me, it's a very, does the egg comes first or does the chicken
Mm.
comes first sort of question. So I just think that it's rather than really investigating with the source of how these stereotypes come to be, I think perhaps we should put more emphasis of how, language, no matter if it's perpetuating stereotypes or creating stereotypes, how it is able to take a life on its own and already be able to, inflict or stimulate so many different kind of emotions and thoughts and connotations. So I think these are already sufficient evidence to prove that language is a very powerful tool, and hence we need to really use it with caution because of how much powers it carries. So yes, that's basically the central message of which I want to bring out in this podcast, of which it is how how language, even though it's a social construct, something that we've created and does not have any tangible values, it is still a inherently very powerful tool. And I think in our next episode, Telia, you're going to walk us through how that power is can be supported in so many applications in our daily lives. For example, I think you were going to talk about colors and how a language is used between different cultures. So yes, I hope you guys have enjoyed our discussion today, and if you have any further ideas of how language has changed our reality and how powerful language is, feel free to comment below and let us know your thoughts. And we'll see you next time on The Uncommon Senses.